A person who has never lost their temper in their life and is always backing down in a state of compliance is often keeping a most ferocious beast locked up inside their subconscious. When you attempt to completely eliminate your negative emotions, you are actually handing over the steering wheel of your life to a demon with your own hands. We worship perfection, yet we are often destroyed by the backfire of this very perfection. In today's modern society, which deeply worships toxic positivity, efficiency, and emotional stability, every single one of us has been domesticated into an irreproachable, nice person. You are agreeable and submissive at the workplace, considerate and sensible within the family, and you showcase an exquisite and positive life on social media networks. But have you ever noticed that the harder you try to live correctly, the more intense that nameless fatigue, anxiety, and emptiness deep within your heart becomes? You think that as long as you eradicate all negative emotions, as long as you hide away all selfishness, jealousy, and anger, you will be able to achieve inner peace. But Jungian psychology puts forward an extremely cold and even counter-intuitive warning, which is that the brighter the light, the darker the shadow. When you attempt to completely obliterate the shadow within your heart, you are actually handing over the steering wheel of your life to a demon with your own hands. The mental exhaustion, midlife crises, or sudden personality collapses that the vast majority of us experience are essentially not because we are not good enough, but because we have been nice people for far too long. This manufactured nobility is quietly destroying our most authentic and primitive vitality as human beings. If you look around you, you will see that this pathological conditioning of modern society is everywhere, from high emotional intelligence training in corporate management culture to the ubiquitous check in style toxic positivity on social media. We are being molded step by step into standardized psychological specimens. You cannot have an emotional breakdown. You cannot display selfishness, and you cannot publicly express even a single shred of aggression. Even a refusal in the workplace must be packaged as a tactful art of communication. This high-intensity self-restraint has actually become the heaviest mental shackle for modern people. Psychological research at the University of California once proposed a concept regarding emotional labor, stating that when a person exhibits a positive emotion externally that is completely opposite to their true internal experience for a long time, their cerebral cortex is actually in a high-pressure state of self-monitoring. The longer this state is maintained, the more hollow the individual's self-identity becomes. This explains why in first-tier cities like Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, and Shenzhen, where professional literacy, efficiency, and emotional control are most emphasized, the incidence of various inexplicable psychological illnesses, anxiety disorders, and somatization disorders is terrifyingly high. People are not sick. People are just desperately suffocating the part of themselves that is imperfect yet vibrantly alive. In the ancient tarot system, the 15th major arcana card is called the Devil. If you observe the composition of this card carefully, you will find that it exhibits a very bizarre psychological metaphor. A huge monster with goat horns and bat wings sits enthroned on a pedestal, and at its feet, a naked man and woman are tied with iron chains. According to a superficial worldly understanding, this represents humanity being imprisoned by evil, desire, and fear. But if you shift your gaze just a little closer, you will discover a shocking detail, which is that the iron chains around the necks of this couple are actually extremely loose, so large that they could easily slip their heads out just by bowing down. In other words, this imprisonment is not imposed by an external force at all, but rather they choose to remain within this confinement themselves. The devil in psychology never refers to an external evil force. It is actually the instinct, wildness, aggressiveness, and unspeakable desires that we have personally severed and repressed in the deepest corners of our subconscious. We are afraid that these forces will ruin our image as a good person, and we are afraid that they will cause us to lose social validation, so we voluntarily put on mental chains. We mistakenly believe that we are locking up a demon that will destroy our lives, without realizing that we are simultaneously locking up humanity's most core creativity, passion, and life energy. If we adjust our perspective to a longer historical view, we will see that human culture has always played this game of demonizing instinct. In the European witch trials of the Middle Ages, Thousands of women whose behavior was slightly unconventional, or who had unique insights into herbs and nature, were directly labeled as sea witches and demons and sent to the stake. The church, which held the power of discourse at that time, was so terrified of these women essentially because they exuded an untamed primitive wildness that belonged to nature and was uncontrolled by societal etiquette. Historical research into that dark period shows that the core of the witch trials was not a war for the purity of religious faith, but a large-scale purging and conditioning of the natural instincts in the human collective subconscious by the patriarchal social ideology. Society implanted a terrifying subconscious stamp into all ordinary people through public executions of these rebels. As long as you dare to display a modicum of personality and aggression that exceeds worldly norms, you are an accomplice of the devil. This historical, level collective intimidation has evolved into the self-censorship within each of us today. When you are serving tea and pouring water for your boss in the office, not daring to refuse unreasonable overtime, the judge within your heart is actually playing the role of those fanatical religious inquisition judges back then, desperately suffocating the sparks of your inner rebellion. This repression of the inner shadow has been explored countless times in Western classic literary masterpieces. Goethe created an extremely fascinating antagonistic character in his epic Faust, which is the devil Mephistopheles. When Faust asks Mephistopheles who he actually is, the devil gives an answer that shocked the history of human thought, saying that he is that power which eternally wills evil and eternally works good. This seemingly contradictory paradox reveals an extremely profound truth of Jungian psychology. Mephistopheles, as the incarnation of the repressed shadow in Faust's personality, tempts Faust to experience carnal lust, to pursue power, and to break all worldly moral taboos. On the surface, he is constantly enticing a noble scholar toward degeneration, but it is precisely this provocation and impact from the devil that completely activates Faust's soul, which had already died rigid inside the ivory tower. Without the devil's wicked deeds, it would have been impossible for Faust to break the boundaries of cognition, and even less possible for him to achieve ultimate spiritual redemption after experiencing all the pain and disillusionment. Literary masters realized a truth long ago, which is that a pure life of a saint, without a single trace of impurity, is a dry well of the spirit. All human creativity and the evolution of civilization often originate from how we face and how we transform that primitive driving force, deemed as a devil. We can translate this literary metaphor into real life, and look at those super geniuses who changed the course of the world. British biographers have delved deep into the private life of the physicist Isaac Newton. In the eyes of the world, Newton is the pinnacle of rationalism, the founder of modern science, living like a perfect and pure wise man. But very few people know that in his later years, Newton was madly obsessed with alchemy and occultism, and his personality was extremely solitary, irascible, and he even possessed an extremely cruel psychological vengefulness in the academic community. He once utilized his supreme power in the Royal Society to mobilize all administrative and public opinion, means to comprehensively suppress and obliterate his rivals Robert Hooke and Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz. If judged by the standards of the modern workplace, Newton was definitely a dark, selfish, and extremely controlling wicked person in interpersonal relationships. But it was precisely this near-obsessive fanaticism, the thirst for absolute control, and the aggressiveness that would never stop until the goal was achieved, that became the spiritual fuel for him to single-handedly pioneer a new world in the scientific wasteland. If Newton had been an agreeable person who understood the ways of the world, who believed that taking a step back opens up boundless horizons, and who was gentle and refined, he would have in all probability spent his life mediocrity amidst endless social engagements and academic compromises. His greatness shared the exact same neural circuit as his dark side. The exact same metaphor also exists in religious mythology. In Christian mythology, Lucifer, the angel most favored by God, chose to rebel out of arrogance and ultimately fell into hell to become Satan. If we deconstruct this myth from a psychological perspective, Lucifer's fall is essentially the inevitable price for the awakening of human consciousness. Before the fall, angels lived a perfect, absolutely pure life in heaven without absolute self-awareness. But this purity came at the cost of losing independent individuality and free will. Lucifer's rebellion represents humanity breaking that illusory greenhouse, like perfection, choosing to fall into a realistic world full of conflict, desire, and darkness. Without this fall, humanity would forever remain merely soulless puppets under a divine order. Just as Jung said, a person's awakening often begins with breaking false perfection. You need to allow yourself to experience a spiritual fall, to touch those psychological territories regarded by society as unclean, incorrect, and immoral, before you can truly grow your own flesh, bones, and soul. This myth actually has a more interesting mirror projection in Eastern culture, which is Sunday Wukong, the Monkey King in the Chinese classical masterpiece Journey to the West. Before making a havoc in heaven, Sunday Wukong was a natural demon monkey driven entirely by primitive wildness and free instinct. He dared to title himself the great sage equal to heaven, smashed the ledger of life and death in the underworld, and completely subverted the absolute orderly ruling structure established by the heavenly court. At this time, Sunday Wukong was the purest devil and shadow in the eyes of the Jade Emperor. But when faced with this lawless shadow, the heavenly court's first reaction was not to understand and transform it, but to amnesty and suppress it. They attempted to completely domesticate this force using hollow official titles and the Five Elements Mountain. When Sunday Wukong was placed with the Golden Hoop and embarked on the journey to the West to fetch scriptures, he actually stepped onto the path of persona conditioning that modern people are most familiar with. The monsters he killed along the way were each actually his previously severed and rejected primitive wild alter, egos in Jungian psychology. One detail is that when he finally attained Buddhahood and the Golden Hoop automatically disappeared, that once agile, daring, and infinitely capable Monkey King had also turned into a silent clay deity sitting on a lotus platform. Eastern literati were actually warning us through this tragic myth that when a person's primitive demon energy is completely washed clean, their life force is basically declared drained. Jungian psychology defines this mechanism as the shadow archetype. The shadow does not refer to those evil, anti-human criminal impulses. In its essence, it is simply the entire part of the personality that was rejected, denied, and exiled to the depths of the subconscious by the mainstream culture, family, education, and ego consciousness during our growth process. When you were still a child, if you showed a possessiveness over toys, your parents might have accused you of being selfish. If you expressed anger in front of outsiders, your elders might have criticized you for having no manners. In order to obtain the love of your caregivers, and to survive safely in this world, your consciousness developed a set of persona expected by society with extreme intelligence. You polished your mask until it shone brightly, smiled at everyone you met, and conceded in everything. But behind the mask, you packed up those traits of selfishness, jealousy, aggressiveness, and vanity, and threw them into the black hole of the subconscious. This black hole is your shadow. As your age increases, your persona becomes more and more perfect, and your shadow grows larger and larger. We can introduce data from modern developmental psychology to see this process more deeply. The psychological community once conducted a famous cross-cultural observation experiment on children's behavior. Researchers found that the grabbing, jealousy, and exclusive behaviors displayed by young children around 4 to 5 years old during games are completely cross-cultural, natural, instinctive reactions. However, with the deepening of education, by the time they reach 7 to 8 years old, these behaviors drop off a cliff at an extremely fast rate among children in the East Asian Confucian cultural sphere. Because our education system possesses an extremely efficient shame feedback mechanism, the teacher's gaze, the parent's sigh, and the reward of little red flowers for good children are all repeatedly telling this child that your jealousy is disgusting and your competing is shameful. This high-intensity obedience training lasting over a decade allows modern people to complete a precise psychological castration within their bodies before adulthood. We successfully cultivate countless compliant corporate infants who hand in homework on time, never cause trouble for society, and are obedient within their office cubicles. But the price is that after the age of 30, these people universally face a deeply profound sense of meaninglessness, because their conscious personality is built upon a complete betrayal of their true self. Yet the most terrifying law of the subconscious lies in the fact that nothing you repress will ever truly disappear. They will silently breed in the dark, and launch a frenzied revenge on your real life in ways you would least expect. Jung has a famous quote that still sends chills down one's spine to read today, stating that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. How many people go through this mockery of fate every day? A nice person who is subservient in life and never dares to refuse anyone might suddenly lose control and explode one day over an extremely trivial matter, committing an extreme act that ruins the lives of their entire family. A high-level executive who is extremely perfectionistic in the workplace and absolutely does not allow themselves to make mistakes might exhibit severe depression out of nowhere in midlife, completely losing social functioning. A moralist with a psychological fetish for purity, who frantically denounces any infidelity and immoral behavior, might harbor the most unspeakable fetches in private. This is by no means an accidental slip. This is the long-repressed shadow staging a devastating coup against the conscious personality after accumulating sufficient energy. Because the shadow not only contains the negative traits we detest, it also hides a secret that very few people see through, which is the golden shadow. When you choose to stifle your individuality and edge to cater to the mediocrity of the masses, when you force yourself to become mild and submissive just to fit in, you simultaneously dump your ambition, your unique creativity, your courage to subvert rules, and your intense intuition into the shadow like garbage. This is why many modern people feel like a walking corpse at a young age. You haven't done anything bad. You live so flawlessly that no one can find fault. Yet you are just not happy. You have lost your passion for life, lost your sense of humor, and lost the ability to love and be loved. This is because the primitive life energy within your body has been completely locked down by yourself. At the same time that you locked the demon of your heart into hell, you also buried the deity within your body alive. So how do we save ourselves in this psychological crisis caused by an excessive pursuit of perfection? The prescription given by Jung is extremely shocking, which is that you need to integrate your shadow. Integrating the shadow absolutely does not mean letting go of your desires to become an evil person who commits multiple crimes. Nor do academia and the field of psychology advocate that you completely tear off your mask to hurt those around you. True integration is a spiritual alchemy that requires immense courage. Just as the most famous maxim of the ancient alchemists stated, "In filth and feces, you will find the gold you desire most." The power you need is precisely hidden in the place you are least willing to look at directly and feel most ashamed of. What you need to do is to go deep into the dungeon of your subconscious, with a clear awareness, to re-examine those demons you have exiled. From the perspective of clinical psychological intervention, the first step of integrating the shadow often begins with learning to say no and allowing yourself to expose shameful selfishness. Famous contemporary psychologists have discovered in the latest research on cognitive behavioral therapy that patients who have been in a state of internal friction for a long time experience an instantaneous drop in their anxiety index and physical pain once they are permitted to release their aggression to their heart's content or play a selfish villain in a sandbox simulation or role play. This is known in psychology as the benign release of the shadow, when you no longer regard jealousy as a moral sin, but rather as an accurate coordinate of inner desire. Jealousy transforms into a radar for you to find the goals of your true self. When you no longer regard anger as a manifestation of bad manners, but rather as a defensive weapon to protect your psychological boundaries, anger transforms into the armor you rely on to survive in this cruel world. When you feel extremely jealous of someone, do not rush to feel ashamed and blame yourself, because precisely behind that jealousy hides your repressed true ambition and the life you truly desire but dare not pursue. When anger and aggressiveness ignite within your heart, do not rush to recite scriptures to suppress it, but rather go and see if your boundaries are being frantically trampled on by others, while your mask is forcing you to continue swallowing your pride. Anger is the teeth grown out of the soul. For a person without aggression, their kindness is worthless. A person who truly possesses great wisdom and a complete personality is never a flawless saint, but rather someone who, after seeing all the darkness in their heart and experiencing all of their own selfishness and weakness, still chooses to walk firmly forward while carrying these shadows. True kindness is by no means submission chosen because you are weak and powerless, lacking the ability to hurt others. True kindness is when you clearly know how powerful the demon in your heart is. when you possess the lightning means to flip the table and hurt others at any moment. Yet you still choose restraint, choosing to treat this world with gentleness. This compassion established upon the mastery of the shadow is what possesses truly soul, shaking personality power. Please stop feeling ashamed of the imperfections within your heart. Acknowledge your selfishness, accept your jealousy, allow your occasional inner darkness, and even leave a space of independent breathing for that wild beast inside your heart. Go and break that false mask woven for you by social moral expectations and worldly success standards. Only when you dare to look directly into the abyss, dare to welcome the demon from the dungeon into your inner spiritual court, and transform it into your armor and edge against this cruel world, can you be considered to have truly lived, because the soul does not need your hypocrisy and nobility, it only wants your wholeness and authenticity. If we take another step forward to explore an ultimate psychological scenario, what would happen if a society reached the day where every single person could clearly face and integrate their own shadow? That would be an era where hypocritical masks are completely shattered and true independent personalities fully awaken. People would no longer easily sacrifice their true emotions for hollow grand narratives, would no longer suppress their primitive desires to cater to the consumption traps of capital, and would certainly not engage in spiritual trials of one another just to play a morally perfect fake human. At that time, the aggressiveness of every individual would be transformed into creativity to combat worldly mediocrity, and everyone's ambition would be transformed into the fuel that drives the evolution of individual life to a higher dimension. That would be the ultimate state of human civilization that is truly healthy, full, and brimming with infinite possibilities. Please stop feeling ashamed of the imperfections within your heart. Acknowledge your selfishness, accept your jealousy, allow your occasional inner darkness, and even leave a space of independent breathing for that wild beast inside your heart. Go and break that false mask woven for you by social moral expectations and worldly success standards. Only when you dare to look directly into the abyss, dare to welcome the demon from the dungeon into your inner spiritual court, and transform it into your armor and edge against this cruel world, can you be considered to have truly lived, because the soul does not need your hypocrisy and nobility, it only wants your wholeness and authenticity.